Ukrainian officials say Russian forces have captured a hospital and taken patients and staff hostage in the besieged city of Mariupol. Key points: patients and doctors are among those reportedly taken hostage by Russian forces in a hospital in Mariupol. Patients and doctors are among those reportedly taken hostage by Russian forces in a hospital in Mariupol. The UN says about 700 civilians have been confirmed, but the true figure is likely much higher. The UN says about 700 civilians have been confirmed, but the true figure is likely much higher. About 2,000 cars have left Mariupol, and another 2,000 are waiting to make the journey to Zaporozhye. The Donetsk regional governor said Russian forces were holding more than 400 people, including patients and doctors, hostage in the basement of an intensive care hospital in Mariupol. Pavlo Kirilenko said the hospital was ed, but staff continued to treat patients in the basement as high-rise buildings burned around them. It comes after a lie attack on a maternity hospital in the city last week. The Mariupol City Council reported 2,000 civilian cars had managed to leave along a humanitarian corridor that runs more than 260 kilometers west to the city of Zaporozhye. The City Council said another 2,000 cars were waiting to leave along the route. It was not clear if the number of departed vehicles given on Tuesday included 160 cars that left the day before. Russian shelling leaves apartment buildings heavily damaged and destroys a shopping mall in western Mariupol. Russia continues armament of Ukraine's capital. With the number of people driven from the country by the war eclipsing 3 million, large explosions thundered across Kyiv before dawn on Tuesday from what Ukrainian authorities said were artillery strikes, as Russia's assault on the capital appeared to become more systematic and edged closer to the city center. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said barrages hit 4 multi-story buildings in the city and dozens of people. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 4 minutes 15 seconds 4 minutes and 15 seconds Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities ratchet up. The shelling ignited a huge fire in a 15-story apartment building and spurred a frantic rescue effort. The strikes, carried out on the 20th day of Russia's invasion, targeted a western district of Kyiv, disrupting a relative calm that returned after an initial advance by Moscow's forces was stopped in the early days of the war. The UN said close to 700 civilians had been confirmed, with the true figure probably much higher. The Ukrainian government said new aid and evacuation efforts would take place on Tuesday along 9 corridors around the country, including the Kyiv region. Many past attempts failed amid continued fighting. A 35-hour curfew is in place in Ukraine's embattled capital. Meanwhile, US officials said Russian forces were about 15 kilometers from the center of the city as of Monday. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko announced a 35-hour curfew extending through Thursday morning. Tuesday's artillery strikes hit the Sviatoshinsky district of western Kyiv, adjacent to the suburb of Irpin, which had seen some of the worst fighting of the war. Flames shot out of the 15-story apartment building and smoke choked the air as firefighters climbed ladders to rescue people. The assault blackened several floors of the building, ripped a hole in the ground outside, and blew out windows in neighboring apartment blocks. Rescue workers said at least one person was loading. Yesterday we extinguished one fire, today another. It is very difficult, a firefighter who gave only his first name, Andriy, said outside the building, tears falling from his eyes. People are dying, and the worst thing is that children are dying. They haven't lived their lives and they have already seen this. Resident Volodymyr Trofimov said he watched as a building was hit. And then there was a howl, and I watched out of the window, and it crashed into the building and all the windows were smashed, he said. Shockwaves from an explosion also damaged the entry to a downtown subway station that has been used as a shelter. City authorities tweeted an image of the blown-out facade and said trains would no longer stop at the station. A 10-story apartment building in the Podilsky district of Kyiv, north of the government quarter, was damaged. Russian forces also stepped up strikes overnight on Irpin and the northwest Kyiv suburbs of Hostomel and Bucha, said the head of the capital region, Alexei Kuleba. Many streets have been turned into a mush of steel and concrete. People have been hiding for weeks in basements and are afraid to go out even for evacuations, Mr. Kuleba said on Ukrainian television. 2 journalists have also been reportedly in the attacks. Fox News video journalist Pierre Zaporozhye was when the vehicle he was traveling in was hit by fire on Monday on the outskirts of Kyiv, the network said. Another woman, Alexandra Kuvshinova, was also reported to have been, according to Fox News reporter Yonat Frilling. Frilling said on social media that Kuvshinova, 24, was during attacks on Kyiv on Monday. It's a nightmare what Russia is doing. In the country's east, Russian forces launched more than 60 strikes overnight Monday on Ukraine's second-largest city, Kyiv, according to Regional Administration Chief Ole Syniehubov. The strikes hit the city's historical center, including the main marketplace. Mr. Syniehubov said fires were raging and rescuers pulled dozens of bodies of civilians from the ruins of destroyed apartment buildings. In Mykolaiv, a strategic southern city near the Black Sea where airstrikes 9 people on Sunday, residents braced for more attacks. Volunteers prepared food and sorted donated clothes at an abandoned naval yard that was turned into a support center for soldiers. Molotov cocktails were on hand to take on invaders. "We are ed during the day and during the night," said Svetlana Grishchenko, whose soldier son was in the fighting. "It's a nightmare what Russia is doing on the territory of Ukraine." Ukraine's parliament voted to extend martial law for another month, until April 24. Under the measure, requested by Mr. Zelensky, men between 18 and 60 are barred from leaving the country so they can be called up to fight. Russia sanctions Joe Biden's dad. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 33 seconds 33s, White House press secretary mocks Russia for sanctioning Joe Biden's dad. The White House made light of Russia's retaliatory sanctions against U.S. officials on Tuesday, saying Moscow may have inadvertently sanctioned the deceased father of Joe Biden by omitting the suffix Jr. from the spelling of the U.S. president's name. Earlier, Russia said it had placed Mr. Biden, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, CIA Chief William Burns, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and a handful of other U.S. officials on a stop list that bars them from entering the country. "I would first note that President Biden is a junior, so they may have sanctioned his dad," Ms. Psaki told reporters. "The second piece I would say is that, won't surprise any of you, that none of us are planning tourist trips to Russia. None of us have bank accounts that we won't be able to access. So we will forge ahead." European leaders head to Kyiv. The leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia have set out for Kyiv by train. As for the latest round of talks, Ukrainian presidential aide Mikhailo Podolyak said they were discussing a ceasefire and Russian troops' withdrawal from Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow would press its demands that Ukraine drop its bid to join NATO, adopt a neutral status, and demilitarize. The leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia set out for Kyiv by train despite the security risks, in a visit EU officials said was not sanctioned by other members of the 27-nation bloc. The aim of the visit is to express the European Union's unequivocal support for Ukraine and its freedom and independence, Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala said. He was joined by fellow Prime Ministers Janez Janša of Slovenia and Mateusz Morawiecki of Poland, as well as Jaroslaw Kaczynski, Poland's de facto leader. Meanwhile, Mr. Zelensky told Northern European leaders they could help yourself by helping us, as he appealed for more weapons to counter Russia's invasion. Mr. Zelensky pushed for a full trade embargo on Russia, calling it a rogue state. Speaking to leaders of the Joint Expeditionary Force via video link on Tuesday, he said the Ukrainian military was rapidly using up weapons and other hardware that Western nations have shipped to his country. He also appealed for a full trade embargo on Russia, saying sanctions have not been enough. "We have to acknowledge Russia as a rogue state, and there has to be a trade embargo